The restaurant didn't fall silent when Don Salvatore Moretti entered. Silence implied choice. This was instinct. Sound drained out of the room the way blood leaves a body when something vital has been pierced. Conversations collapsed mid-sentence. A laugh died in someone's throat. Crystal stemware paused in midair, hands tightening just enough to keep from dropping it. La Fenice had been built to impress men who believed money was power, and power was permanence. Tonight, it bowed to something older. Angelica stood near the service station, holding a tray of water glasses she had already checked twice. She had polished each rim with a cloth dampened only with steam. No lemon, no oil, no scent. She'd learned that long ago. Scent was memory, and memory could offend. She kept her eyes down. That was how she survived. Angelica had perfected invisibility the way other people perfected charm. Her posture was modest, her movements efficient, her presence forgettable. She didn't flirt. She didn't chatter. She didn't make mistakes that required explanation. At 24, she worked more hours than she slept. Tips paid rent. Rent paid for her mother's oxygen machine. Everything else was noise. The doors opened. Bodyguards entered first. 4 men, all broad-shouldered and alert. Suits cut to conceal weapons rather than bodies. They scanned the room in practiced arcs, eyes sharp, faces empty. Then came Thomas Moretti. He was tall, composed, terrifyingly calm. His suit was dark charcoal, tailored so precisely it seemed grown rather than sewn. He didn't look at the diners. He didn't need to. His attention was elsewhere. Angles, reflections, exits. A man who survived by assuming betrayal. Angelica felt it then. That prickle at the base of her neck. The sense of a pressure change. And finally, Don Salvatore Moretti. Age had bent him but not softened him. He walked with a cane topped in silver, his left hand resting lightly on Thomas's arm. His face was carved by decades of command. His eyes were dark, hooded, endlessly patient. Predators did not rush. The maitre d', Gerard, bowed so deeply Angelica thought he might collapse. Don Salvatore, Mr. Moretti, we are honored. Don Salvatore lifted one finger. Gerard stopped breathing. This place, the Don said slowly, his accent thickened by age and memory, smells wrong. The word wrong landed like a verdict. Thomas's gaze flicked across the room, sharp and assessing. The bodyguard stiffened. Angelica's heart stuttered. Perhaps the flowers, Don Salvatore, Gerard offered, voice trembling. We can remove them. No. The Don sniffed the air again. Not flowers. His eyes moved and landed on her. You, he said. Angelica stepped forward automatically. Her spine straightened. Her face remained calm. Yes, sir. You poured the water. Yes, Don Salvatore. There is citrus. Angelica shook her head. No, sir. The temperature dropped. Gerard hissed her name under his breath like a curse. Don Salvatore turned fully toward her. You contradict me. Angelica felt every eye in the room snap to her. She could almost hear the internal calculations being made. How quickly she could be removed. How easily replaced. With respect, she said, voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. There is no citrus, just water. Filtered. Served clean. Thomas watched her closely now, the Don's lips pressed into a thin line. Then why does it smell like Sicily done badly? Angelica should have apologized. She should have bowed, retreated, vanished. Instead, something older than fear rose up inside her. Something stubborn. Something her grandmother had called bones. She lifted her eyes and spoke. Ku sapi uveru sapuri nun spaglia, she said quietly. The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. The effect was immediate. A fork slipped from someone's hand and struck the marble floor. A woman gasped. One of the guards shifted instinctively, as if reacting to a gunshot. Don Salvatore froze. Thomas went utterly still. Angelica realized, too late, that she had not spoken Italian. She had spoken Sicilian, not the softened performative version taught in language apps or overheard in restaurants. This was the old inland dialect, thick and precise, shaped by mountains and hunger and long memory. The dialect of men who no longer existed. The Don's cane hovered inches above the floor. "Say that again," he whispered. Angelica's mouth went dry. She swallowed. "Eulimuni bonu non grida," she continued, voice low but clear. "Senti sulu kusapi." A good lemon doesn't shout. Only those who know can hear it. Silence hardened into something solid. Thomas took a slow step forward, eyes never leaving her face. "My grandfather," he said carefully, "used to say that." Don Salvatore's gaze searched Angelica's features as if trying to peel back years, layers, disguises. "Where?" he asked softly. "Did a girl like you learn the bones of my language?" Angelica lowered her eyes. "My grandmother," she said. "She raised me." The Don studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was not a kind sound, but it wasn't cruel either. "Bring the chef," he said, "and keep this girl." Gerard nodded frantically, relief and terror warring on his face. Thomas didn't move. He was still watching Angelica, not as staff, not as furniture, as a question. Angelica turned away, heart hammering, knowing with absolute certainty that something irreversible had just begun. She had spoken, and the room would never forget her again. Angelica returned to the service station with her hand steady and her pulse still trying to escape her chest. Around her, the restaurant breathed again, but carefully. Conversations resumed in lower registers. Laughter sounded strained, like it was being tested before release. No one looked directly at the Moretti table anymore. They looked around it, the way people look around a storm. Gerard materialized at her side, pale and sweating. "What did you say?" he whispered. "Nothing," Angelica replied. It was the truth, in a way. She hadn't planned to say anything. She had simply refused to let a lie sit unchallenged. Gerard stared at her like she'd grown another face. "You spoke to him." Angelica adjusted the napkin stack. "He asked. That's why I keep you here." Angelica didn't respond. She didn't need to. She knew what she was to La Fenice. Reliable silence. Tonight, she had cracked that roll open. Across the room, Thomas Moretti took his seat opposite his father. He did not relax. His back remained straight, shoulders squared, eyes sweeping the mezzanine in controlled arcs. But every few seconds, his gaze flicked back to Angelica. Not lingering, not obvious. Assessing. The chef arrived, trembling, apologies already forming. Don Salvatore waved him closer, barked a question about citrus sourcing, volcanic soil, harvest months. The chef answered correctly. Don Salvatore grunted, satisfied. Angelica served the first course under the weight of 100 unspoken thoughts. She moved like she always did, quiet, precise, but something had shifted. The guards noticed her now. One of them tracked her path with professional interest. When she poured water, Thomas spoke. "You're from the interior," he said, not looking at her. Angelica paused. "Excuse me, sir." "The dialect," he continued. "Not coastal, not Palermo, inland." Angelica held the bottle steady. "My grandmother was." Thomas's eyes lifted. They were lighter than she'd expected, steel blue, sharp and cold. "She taught you more than language." Angelica met his gaze briefly, just long enough. "She taught me not to waste words." A corner of his mouth twitched, not a smile, something else. Don Salvatore cut in. The girl has manners. Let her work. Thomas leaned back, but the interest didn't fade. Dinner continued. Angelica noticed things she tried not to notice. The man 2 tables below the mezzanine who hadn't touched his food. The way his jacket sat too stiff across his chest. The way his eyes kept drifting, not to the dawn, but to the windows. She told herself not to care. This was not her world. She was almost back to the kitchen when the thought struck her, sharp, unwelcome. That reflection wasn't candlelight. She turned. The window across the street glinted. Once! Angelica's body moved before her fear could. Down! She screamed. She slammed into the table, flipping it sideways with strength born not of size but leverage and instinct. The wine glass shattered mid-air as the shot rang out. The bullet punched into solid wood where Don Salvatore's chest had been seconds before. Chaos exploded. Guards drew weapons. Diners screamed. Someone dropped to the floor sobbing. Thomas tackled his father, dragging him behind the overturned table. Another man, gray suit, too stiff, reached into his jacket on the stairs. He never fired. 2 shots took him down. Angelica hit the floor hard, glass cutting into her arm. She didn't feel it until later. Her ears rang. Her breath came in sharp bursts. When the shouting stopped, the room smelled like gunpowder and spilled wine. Thomas stood slowly. His eyes found her immediately. She was crouched near the fallen table, blood seeping through her sleeve. Not crying, not frozen, alert. How? Don Salvatore rasped, gripping Thomas's arm. Did she know? Angelica looked up. She knew the answer would not save her. I saw the reflection, she said. Thomas stared at the table, at the bullet hole, at her. That wasn't luck, he said quietly. He reached her first. His grip on her arm was firm, not cruel, but inescapable. You're coming with us. Angelica's stomach dropped. I didn't do anything wrong, she said. Thomas's voice was low, dangerous, controlled. That's what worries me. They moved fast. Through the kitchen, out the back, into the waiting SUV. Angelica didn't scream. She didn't fight. But as the doors sealed shut and the city blurred past bulletproof glass, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was no longer invisible, and the powerful had noticed. The SUV was a moving vault. Thick glass sealed out sound and consequence alike. The engine hummed low, smooth, unstoppable. Outside, Manhattan slid past in streaks of neon and rain-slicked asphalt. Inside, the air was heavy with unsaid things. Angelica sat pressed against the door, hands folded tightly in her lap. Blood from the cut on her arm had soaked into the fabric of her uniform, darkening the white to rust. Thomas Moretti sat across from her. He didn't speak. He watched, not with anger, not with hunger, with analysis, the kind that peeled away layers. You're bleeding, he said at last. Angelica glanced down. It's fine. You should have flinched sooner. She looked up. Excuse me? Most people don't register injury after adrenaline fades, Thomas said. You stayed operational. Angelica swallowed. I grew up poor. Almost a laugh. The car slowed, turned, passed through iron gates that rose silently from the ground. Guards checked the vehicle without making eye contact. The estate loomed. Stone. Lights. Order. Angelica's chest tightened. The doors opened. Cool night air rushed in. Thomas stepped out first, then extended a hand. Not offering, but expecting. Angelica took it. Thomas guided her down a corridor and into a smaller sitting room. A doctor arrived within minutes, bandaging her arm without comment. When they were alone again, Thomas leaned against the door. You're not who you say you are, he said. Angelica met his gaze. I never said I was anyone. You speak an extinct dialect. You spot a sniper. You move like you've been trained. She remained silent. Thomas exhaled slowly. I don't believe in coincidences. Angelica folded her hands tighter. I don't believe in cages. Something in his expression shifted. Good, he said, because I don't offer them. He straightened. You will stay here tonight, not as a prisoner, as a guest. And tomorrow, we'll talk. Angelica considered him, then nodded. Then tomorrow, she said. Thomas opened the door. As she followed the staff member down the hall, Angelica felt the weight of choice pressing in. She had broken her silence, saved a life she did not owe. Now she would learn what truth cost. Angelica did not sleep. The room they gave her was larger than her entire apartment in Queens. A king-sized bed dressed in linen so soft it felt unreal. Heavy curtains muted the outside world. A small lamp glowed on the nightstand, its light warm and steady. She sat on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on, back straight, hands folded, listening. Houses like this had a sound. They didn't creak like old apartments or hum like overworked buildings. They breathed quietly, confidently. Security systems whispered through the walls. Footsteps passed at measured intervals. Somewhere far away, a door opened and closed with surgical precision. Angelica cataloged it all without trying. It was how she had survived childhood, by learning the language of places, of danger, of power. She rolled up her sleeve. The bandage was neat, professional. The cut would scar, thin, and pale. A reminder. Her grandmother would have called it a sign. Angelica lay back eventually, eyes open, staring at the ceiling until the faint gray of dawn crept in at the edges of the curtains. When the knock came, she was already standing. A woman in a tailored black suit waited outside, posture respectful but not deferential. Mr. Moretti would like to see you, she said. Angelica nodded. Now? Yes. No please. No threat. Just fact. Thomas's office was smaller than she expected. No ostentation. Dark wood shelves lined with books, history, economics, law. A desk cleared of clutter. One window overlooking the estate's inner garden. Thomas stood by the window when she entered, hands clasped behind his back. He turned. You slept? He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. Sit. She did. He remained standing. My father is resting, Thomas said. Doctors say he'll recover fully. I'm glad. He studied her face. You saved his life. I didn't think, Angelica said. I acted. That's worse, Thomas replied quietly. Thinking people hesitate. She absorbed that. Tell me about your grandmother, he said. Angelica hesitated, not because she feared him, but because memory hurt. She was small, Angelica said, sharp. She spoke 3 dialects and refused to teach me English until I could argue with her in Sicilian. Thomas's mouth curved faintly. That sounds like a woman who knew what mattered. She knew silence was dangerous, Angelica said. She taught me when to use it and when not to. Thomas moved at last, sitting on the edge of his desk, posture relaxed, but alert. You disrupted a room full of powerful men, he said. Not by shouting, by being precise. Angelica met his gaze. Precision is respect. He nodded slowly. Last night, Thomas continued. Someone inside my organization tried to kill my father. Angelica's chest tightened. You think I'm involved? I think you're inconvenient, he said frankly. And inconvenient people usually get removed. She held his gaze. Usually. A long pause. Except, Thomas said, you saved him. Angelica didn't respond. My father believes in debts, Thomas said. So do I. She leaned forward slightly. Then let me leave. Thomas's eyes sharpened. Why? Because staying makes me a liability, and I don't belong in your world. He considered that. You already stepped into it. She didn't deny that either. There's something happening, Thomas said. Something internal. I need eyes that aren't owned. Angelica's pulse ticked up. You want to use me? I want to give you a choice, he corrected. Stay for now. Help me understand what I'm missing. In return, you leave unharmed, paid, unfollowed. And after? After, Thomas said. You decide. Angelica thought of her mother, of rent, of running forever. Then she thought of the man in the gray suit, of the reflection, of the bullet meant for a heart. 3 conditions, she said. Thomas didn't interrupt. No innocent blood, Angelica continued. No lies told using my name. And if I say I'm done, you let me go. Thomas studied her like a chessboard he hadn't seen before. Finally, he nodded. Agreed. Angelica exhaled. The deal was made. Not with a handshake. With trust balanced on a blade. Angelica learned the estate by listening. She learned which corridors carried echoes and which swallowed sound, which guards rotated shifts with mechanical precision, and which lingered too long at corners, talking quietly into sleeves. She learned where cameras blinked red and where they did not blink at all. No one ordered her to do this. No one had to. Thomas kept his distance, but not his attention. She noticed the way he watched people when he thought no one was watching him, the way his jaw tightened when reports mentioned delays, not losses, the way he corrected language before he corrected action. He was a man who believed words shaped reality. That made him dangerous. 2 days after the assassination attempt, Thomas brought her into the war room. Maps covered the walls. Digital displays glowed with numbers and movements. Men twice her size went quiet when she entered, not because she demanded it, but because Thomas's presence bent the air around him. This is Angelica, Thomas said. She's here to observe. No title, no explanation, just truth. A man with a scarred face frowned. Observe what? Us, Thomas replied. Angelica stood near the back, arms folded loosely, eyes scanning. She didn't look at the screens first. She looked at the men. Who spoke freely? Who watched Thomas before answering? Who smiled when numbers went up? And who didn't? One name kept resurfacing. Carlo Vitelli. Old guard. Loyal. Family friend. Too careful. After the meeting, Angelica spoke. You trust him, she said. Thomas didn't ask who. I've known him since childhood. He avoided specifics, Angelica replied. Used broad language. Never committed to a number. Thomas's expression darkened. You think he's involved. I think he's afraid, Angelica said. And afraid men hide things. That night, Thomas's suspicions became facts. Accounts froze. Transfers triggered alarms. Someone had tried to drain resources quietly, like pulling blood through a needle. Vitelli disappeared. The estate locked down. Thomas moved like a storm. Fast, decisive. But he didn't lose control. Angelica watched him coordinate without raising his voice. Watched loyalty shift in real time. They're watching you, she said later, when they were alone. I know. They'll follow strength, she said. But they'll obey clarity. Thomas looked at her. And what does clarity look like? She held his gaze, exposed the truth, publicly, no executions in the dark. Silence stretched. That went against everything the family had ever done. Finally, Thomas nodded. Stay close, he said. This isn't over. Angelica didn't answer. She already knew. The first mistake Carlo Vitelli made was running. The second was assuming Thomas Moretti would respond the way his father always had. Vitelli fled to one of the old safe houses on the edge of the river, a place built for disappearing, not defending. He took documents, digital keys, and enough cash to vanish forever. What he didn't take was time. Thomas didn't rage. He didn't shout orders or break furniture. He did something far more unsettling. He slowed everything down. The estate went quiet in a deliberate way. Phones locked, access limited, movement logged. Angelica watched the change ripple through the house like a controlled burn. Panic tried to surface and found nowhere to breathe. Thomas called a meeting. Vitelli's absence was a bruise on the room. Thomas stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the polished wood. Angelica stood off to the side, unobtrusive, listening. "Someone tried to kill my father," Thomas said. "That is not a rumor. That is a fact." No one spoke. "That someone also attempted to empty our accounts," he continued. "That failed." Eyes flicked. Muscles tightened. "I will not punish a room," Thomas said calmly. "I will punish a person." He gestured, and the screens lit up. Bank records, movement logs, time-stamped authorizations. Carlo Vitelli's name appeared again and again. A collective intake of breath. Thomas let it hang. "He believed I would respond with fear," Thomas said. "He believed I would hide what happened." He turned his head slightly. Angelica stepped forward. "He underestimated truth," she said quietly. The room stilled, not because she was loud, but because she was precise. "Truth doesn't need violence," she continued. "It needs light." Thomas nodded. Vitelli was captured by dawn. Alive. When they brought him back, beaten but breathing, the old rules waited in the air. Basement, silence, disappearance. Thomas refused. He brought Vitelli into the courtyard. In daylight. Angelica stood beside him. "You betrayed this family," Thomas said. "You endangered my father." Vitelli spat blood. "You're weak. Letting a waitress speak for you." Angelica didn't flinch. Thomas didn't strike him. "You wanted power," Thomas said. "You chose exposure." He turned to the guards. "Call the authorities." Shock rippled outward. "You can't," Vitelli croaked. "You don't." "I do," Thomas said, "because I'm done inheriting ghosts." Vitelli screamed as he was dragged away, not to be erased, but to be processed, documented, named. The family watched their old world fracture. Angelica felt something settle in her chest. That night, Thomas found her in the garden. "You changed the rules," he said. "So did you," she replied. He studied her. "You could have asked for anything." "I asked for truth." A pause. "And now?" he asked. Angelica looked at the stars above the estate, clear, distant, unowned. "Now," she said, "I decide who I am without hiding." Thomas inclined his head. For the first time, power listened. After Vitelli was taken away, the estate changed its rhythm. Not visibly, not in ways that could be measured or documented. The guards still patrolled. The gates still locked. The rooms still held their breath the way old houses did. But something intangible had shifted. Fear no longer ran the halls unchecked. People spoke more carefully, not because they were afraid of punishment, but because they were unsure which version of power now governed them, Thomas noticed. So did Angelica. She felt it in the way staff looked at her now, not deferential, not hostile, curious, measuring. Some nodded in quiet respect. Others avoided her entirely. Power hated undefined shapes. Angelica spent her mornings walking the grounds, listening to conversations not meant for her. She never repeated them unless they mattered. Thomas called her into his office on the 5th day. He was standing behind his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. There were faint shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. "You don't need to stay," he said without preamble. Angelica leaned against the doorway. I know. Then why are you still here? She considered the question honestly. Because if I leave now, she said, what happens next happens without witness. Thomas's jaw tightened. You don't trust me. I trust your intentions, Angelica replied. I don't trust systems built before you. That earned a sharp breath. Fair, he said. He gestured to the chair. She sat. My father is awake, Thomas said. He's asking questions. Angelica's stomach nodded. He remembers your voice, Thomas continued. The dialect. She nodded slowly. I expected that. He wants to see you. Silence stretched between them. And? Angelica asked, and I told him no. She looked up sharply. Why? Thomas met her gaze without flinching. Because he would try to define you. Angelica absorbed that. My father believes blood determines purpose, Thomas said. You disrupt that belief. And you? She asked. Thomas leaned back against the desk. I believe choice does. Their eyes held. The air between them was charged, not with desire, but with recognition. Thomas broke it first. I want you to stay on. Formally. Angelica waited. As an advisor, he clarified. Independent. You answer to no one but yourself. And when I disagree with you? He smiled faintly. You already do. Angelica exhaled. On one condition, she said. He lifted a brow. I don't become a symbol, she said. No stories, no whispers, no girl who changed the family. Thomas nodded. Agreed. She stood. Then I'll stay. For now. As she turned to leave, Thomas spoke again. You saved my father, he said quietly. You saved this family from tearing itself apart. Angelica paused at the door. I didn't save anything, she said. I just refused to let lies win. She left him standing there, alone with a future that no longer obeyed him automatically. And for the first time, Thomas realized something unsettling and rare. Power did not sit in his chair. It stood freely and chose to remain. The first challenge came disguised as courtesy. An invitation arrived 3 days later. Thick cream paper, hand-embossed seal, phrased as a celebration of Don Salvatore's recovery. A private gathering. Family only. Old allies. New witnesses. Angelica read it once. Then again. This isn't a dinner, she said. Thomas stood at the window, watching gardeners trim hedges into shapes meant to imply control. No, it's a test, she said, of you. And of you? He replied, turning. They want to see where you sit. Angelica folded the invitation carefully. I won't sit. Thomas studied her. That will be noticed. Good. The night of the gathering, the estate filled with men who carried their histories in their shoulders. Some arrived with sons, some with grudges. All of them arrived curious. Angelica did not wear a gown. She wore a simple black dress, unadorned, hair pulled back, no jewelry, no symbols. She walked in beside Thomas, not behind him, not ahead. The room watched. Don Salvatore sat at the head of the table, color back in his cheeks, eyes sharp. When Angelica entered, his gaze locked onto her. Recognition sparked. Ah, the Don said, the girl with the old tongue. Angelica inclined her head. Don Salvatore. You stand straighter than before, he observed. Power agrees with you. She met his gaze calmly. I don't carry power, sir. I carry responsibility. Murmurs rippled. Thomas felt them before he heard them. Dinner unfolded like theater. Questions disguised as compliments. Jokes sharpened to test edges. So, one man drawled, swirling wine, we hear you found a conscience, Thomas. Thomas smiled faintly. I found clarity. Eyes flicked to Angelica. And you, another said, what do you think you've earned here? Angelica set her fork down gently. Nothing. Silence. I didn't come to earn, she continued. I came to prevent. Don Salvatore leaned forward. Prevent what? The next mistake, Angelica said. And the one after. The Don studied her, then laughed, deep and unguarded. She's dangerous, he said, because she isn't afraid of us. Angelica met his gaze. I'm afraid of many things, sir, just not intimidation. The room shifted again. Later, as plates cleared, a man Angelica hadn't seen before stood. He was younger, smoother, eyes too quick. We respect reform, he said, but tradition holds us together. Angelica stood too. Tradition is memory, she said, not obedience. The man's smile thinned. Careful. Thomas spoke then, voice even, final. She speaks with my authority. The declaration landed like a blade laid flat on a table. The test ended there, and Angelica knew something irreversible had happened. Not because Thomas defended her, because he had chosen her voice over inherited silence. The backlash did not arrive loudly. It arrived politely. Phone calls framed as concern, messages routed through intermediaries, invitations to talk privately, offers of protection disguised as mentorship. Angelica recognized the pattern. When power feels threatened, it first tries to absorb. Thomas ignored most of it. Angelica didn't. She listened. She noticed which families asked questions about her instead of policy, which men spoke about Don Salvatore's health instead of the failed assassination, which ones avoided Thomas's eyes while praising his leadership. They're triangulating, she said one evening, standing beside Thomas at the study window. They're trying to decide whether to remove you or wait for you to fail. Thomas's jaw tightened. Let them. They won't, Angelica said. They'll force a moment. That moment came sooner than she expected. A warehouse on the docks, legitimate on paper, dormant in practice, went up in flames. No casualties, no theft, just fire, a message. Thomas convened the captains within the hour. Angelica stood at the back, listening. This wasn't external, she said before Thomas could speak. Several men bristled. You're sure? One asked sharply. Angelica nodded. The timing, the location. It was meant to provoke reaction, not damage. Thomas looked around the table. Who benefits from chaos? No one answered. Angelica stepped forward. Who benefits if Thomas looks weak? She said. Or impulsive. Eyes shifted. One man stood abruptly. Are you accusing us? I'm inviting you to prove me wrong. Thomas raised a hand. We will not retaliate, he said. We will audit. Groans followed. Anger. Disbelief. Fear has been our currency, Thomas continued. Tonight, we switch. Angelica watched faces harden. Later, in the quiet that followed, Thomas found her in the hallway. You're making enemies, he said. She nodded. So are you. You could leave, he reminded her. And abandon the moment? She asked. This is when truth matters most. Thomas studied her for a long time. You're not doing this for me, he said. No, Angelica replied. I'm doing it because someone has to stand still when everyone else wants blood. That night, evidence surfaced. Financial discrepancies, quiet alliances, names that kept repeating. Not betrayal, preparation. A faction within the family had been waiting for Don Salvatore to die. Thomas ordered a full disclosure. Public. No disappearances. When the news broke, the old families watched something unprecedented unfold. A mafia empire airing its fractures without killing the messenger. Angelica stood beside Thomas as he spoke. Not above him, not behind. When it was over, the room was quiet. Not submissive, thinking. And that was the most dangerous sound of all. The fallout was immediate and uneven. Some families recoiled, offended by the exposure. Others leaned in, curious, calculating. A few went silent entirely, waiting to see who would blink first. Thomas did not blink. He stood before them without armor, without raised voice, without the familiar theater of threat. He presented records. He named betrayals. He refused spectacle. Angelica watched from his side, hands clasped, posture calm. This was not her world, but she understood it. Power, when stripped of illusion, panics. Don Salvatore was brought in at the end. He walked slowly, cane tapping marble, eyes sharper than they'd been in years. He looked at the faces gathered, not with affection, but with appraisal. Then his gaze landed on Angelica. "You speak," the Don said, "and men listen. They listen because they're tired of dying for lies." A murmur moved through the room. Don Salvatore turned to his son. "You let her change you," Thomas answered without hesitation. "No, I chose to change." The old man studied him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he lowered himself into a chair, not in defeat, in acknowledgement. "This house," Don Salvatore said slowly, "was built on fear. Fear made us rich. Fear made us strong." He looked around the room. "Fear also made us stupid." Silence followed, thick, stunned. "I am old," the Don continued. "I will not see the end of what you build, but I will not tear it down." He turned to Angelica. "You do not belong to us," he said. "That is why you were necessary." Angelica inclined her head. "Then let me leave when my work is done." Don Salvatore nodded. "You will." Thomas felt it then. The moment power shifted fully. Not seized, yielded. After the gathering dispersed, Thomas found Angelica in the garden. "You could have stayed," he said. "Taken a role, a name." Angelica looked at the stars above the estate, unclaimed and distant. "I already have a name," she said, "and I want it to mean something outside these walls." He stepped closer, but did not touch her. "What happens to us?" he asked quietly. Angelica met his gaze. "That," she said, "depends on whether you can walk beside me without leading." Thomas nodded once. "I can try." She smiled, not with triumph, but relief. That night, Angelica packed her things, and for the first time in years, she did not feel like she was running. Angelica left the estate at dawn. No convoy, no escort. Just a single car and a driver who did not speak unless spoken to. The gates opened without ceremony, iron sliding back as if nothing extraordinary had happened within them. But Angelica felt the weight of what she carried. Not money, not protection. Consequence. Queen smelled different after the estate. Sharper, louder, alive. Her building was unchanged. The stairs still creaked. The hallway still held the scent of boiled coffee and old paint. Her mother was awake, sitting at the small kitchen table with her oxygen tubing looped loosely around her ears. She looked up as Angelica entered. "You're late," her mother said. Angelica smiled softly. "I know." Her mother studied her face, the faint cut on her arm, the way she stood a little straighter than before. "Did you do something dangerous?" Angelica set down her bag. "I did something honest." Her mother nodded, as if that answered everything. Days passed. Angelica did not return to La Fenice. Instead, she met with teachers, linguists, community organizers. She rented a small space above a closed bookstore and filled it with folding chairs and whiteboards. She taught children dialects their grandparents had been told to forget. She taught them that language was not decoration, it was memory, survival. Thomas called once. "I'm in the city," he said, "if you want to talk." Angelica considered. "Meet me where I work." He arrived without guards. The children stared at him, this tall, composed man in a simple coat, then went back to their lessons. Thomas watched Angelica teach. Not command, not perform. Guide. When the room emptied, he spoke. "You built something." "So did you?" she replied. "They're watching me," Thomas said, "waiting for me to fail." Angelica met his gaze. "Then don't." He exhaled. "I can't be who my father was." "You shouldn't be, and I can't be who you are." She smiled faintly. "Good. That would be a waste." They stood in the quiet room, surrounded by words older than either of them. Thomas broke the silence. "I won't ask you to come back. Thank you. I won't ask you to stay away either." Angelica nodded. "That's choice." He stepped closer. "Not touching. I don't know what this becomes." "Neither do I," she said. "But it will be chosen. Every step." Thomas inclined his head, not as a king, as a man. When he left, Angelica did not feel loss. She felt space. The city moved on the way it always did. Traffic surged. Coffee steamed from paper cups. People hurried past one another carrying lives no one else could see. Angelica walked through it without shrinking. Her days found a rhythm that belonged entirely to her. Mornings teaching, afternoons listening, evenings writing, curriculum plans, grant proposals, notes to herself about words that were disappearing too quickly. The center grew, not loudly, not virally. Parents came first, then grandparents, then children who realized that knowing where you came from made it harder for anyone to tell you where you belonged. Sometimes Angelica caught herself waiting for danger. It didn't come, not because the world had softened, but because she no longer mistook silence for safety. Thomas kept his distance. When news reached her, quiet reforms, dismantled operations, partnerships dissolved rather than avenged, she read it the way one reads weather reports. Not with hope, with attention. Don Salvatore died 6 months later. No violence, no spectacle. At the funeral, Thomas stood alone. Angelica did not attend. She sent a letter instead. 3 lines, handwritten. "Truth outlives fear. You chose it. That matters." Thomas read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. Years later, someone asked Angelica if she had ever been afraid, standing up to men who had ruled through violence for generations. She considered the question. "I was afraid every day I stayed silent," she said. Speaking once just changed the shape of it. She was asked if she regretted walking away from power. Angelica smiled. "I didn't walk away," she said. "I refused to kneel to the wrong version of it." On the wall of the center hung a single phrase, written in chalk and rewritten often by different hands. "Silence is not humility. It is a choice." And choices, Angelica had learned, were the only thing no empire could take. The girl who once poured water and tried not to be seen had become something else entirely. Not a queen, not a legend, just a woman who spoke when it mattered, and then lived a life that proved it. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that quiet strength can change entire worlds, subscribe for more long-form stories where truth confronts power, silence is broken, and dignity always wins.